Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be walking you through how to use REDCap's data import feature. And so this feature allows you to import data from an external source, such as an Excel file, into your REDCap project. And so for the purpose of today, you'll see here that I'm using quite a simple project in that there's not too many forms. So you just have a demographics form, a participant status form, a clinical scale, and an adverse events form. And if you are to check the actual setup of the study, you can see that there are a couple of different time points that are also part of this project. And so in order to import data for different time points, you may need to use these variables here that indicate the particular time point that you want that data to go into. And so to get a better sense of the variables themselves that we have in this database, you'll see by toggling over to the codebook that these are the different types of variables and their affiliated forms. So the data that we're going to be importing will correspond to some of these variables. But checking right now, if you're to go over to the dashboard for this project, you can see that there's currently no data that is listed here. The data that we are looking to import is contained on this Excel file that we have. And so you'll see that there are different participants and there is data that is associated with not only different variables, but different time points here. And so when you are using the import feature in REDCap, one of the first things that you will have to do is just ensure that the data that you're importing matches with a variable in the REDCap project. So what I mean by that is assuring that these column headings here are actually in line and match the variables that you do have in your project. So in order to actually do that, that's where the codebook comes in handy, and that you can see what the variable names are itself. And then once you confirm that the variable names themselves match, the other thing that you'll need to do is confirm and ensure that the codes that you may be using in your Excel file or external source actually align with the coding scheme that is used for particular variables. So say, for example, participant status here, we see that there are different numbers that are being used. And so if we are to go to participant status variable, we'll see that the coding scheme that they are using is 1 through 5. And 1 through 5 represents different types of study statuses. So going here, we also can confirm that the numbers that are being utilized is 1 through 5, so it should be fine for import. So that's just one thing that you will need to ensure before doing any import of data is ensuring that coding scheme matches. So there may be a little bit of data manipulation and cleaning required before you can actually import your data from an external source into REDCap. But for today's presentation, I'm confident that the variable names align with what's in the project and also that the appropriate codes and formatting for variables have been used, so we can proceed. So in order to actually import the data, what you'll need to do is go to this data import tool feature here on the left-hand side. And if you are looking at your database right now and you realize that you don't have this option available, it's probably just because you weren't given the user right to actually import data. So what you would need to do is just contact the person that set up your database and ask them to give you permission for data importing, and they should be able to do that. And then once they do so, you'll be able to see this option here. So going to the data import tool, you'll see that there's a bunch of text here. And one thing that I just want to point out is that if you use or click on this feature at the top, you will see, once I open it up, one second, you'll see here that this actually provides a template that you can use to import data. And so what it essentially did was collect all the different variables that you do have in your respective project up at the top here. So we're not going to be using it for today's import, but just know that this option is available should you want to use it. But going back, let's go back to this browser here. So going to the bottom here, we'll just select the file that we want to import, and I'll select my appropriate CSV file. And that's another thing to point out is that with REDCap, it will only allow you to import CSV files. So if you do have the data stored in another external file type, you will need to transfer that over to CSV. So it may be easier to do in some cases. For this example, I know this file is already stored in CSV, but say I had it in an Excel file, all I would need to do is go to Save As and then select Comment Delimited file and then save. One thing to note though is that if you are doing it with an Excel file and transferring it over to a CSV file, is that it will remove a couple of things. Namely, it will remove any type of formatting that you do have in the Excel file. So say for example, if you're using the highlighter feature, or if you have filters, or if you're using different colors or fonts for the text, all of that will be removed when you save it to a CSV. The additional thing that will be removed is if you have additional sheets in your Excel file. So when saving to a CSV, it will only keep the first sheet that you have in that workbook. So just be sure that you save your CSV files separately so that you're not losing any data when you are transferring from an Excel file into a CSV file type. So once you have your CSV file, all you'll need to do is upload it, and you'll come up with this screen. And so it'll say here that the document was uploaded successfully, but all this prompt really means is that there were no issues that REDCap can identify in your file, and so it will be able to upload the data. And I want to point that out just because if we are to go over to the dashboard itself now, there will be no data that is actually uploaded. What you have to do in order to do that is select this button here at the very bottom to import the data. But why REDCap does that is because it gives you this display table so that you first check the data that you are trying to import and ensure that it is correct and you do want to import this data into your database. And so you'll see here in the summary table that it has identified the records or the participants that I do want to add to the database. And it has also too listed all the data that is to be imported at each respective time point. And so you'll see that all of this is coming up in black text, which means that it's new data that's being entered into or imported into the database. If you saw the text in gray, it would just be showing you that there is data for that particular variable in the database already. So say, for example, if in, let's say for an example here, if this particular participant had in the database already a couple of GAD total scores, then it would be listed here, even though I don't necessarily have it in the Excel file that or the CSV file, sorry, that I'm trying to import. So I'll just highlight that. The other thing to point out is if you are to see red text. And so red text will come up if there is already data in that particular variable for that particular participant ID at that time point already existing in the database. So it comes up in red because it wants you to verify whether or not that data that's already in your database should be overwritten with the data that you are asking to be imported. So it's a really handy tool with REDCap to use. And then the other thing is just red boxes or orange boxes, which will come up if there are reasons why the data that you want to import can't be imported by REDCap. So for the purpose of this data import, we don't see any of that, and it looks good. So we could go ahead and proceed. And then now it will say that it's been imported successfully. And if we're to toggle over to the dashboard, we can see that we have our 5 participants here and that there is now data in these respective forms. And so going into it, you'll see here that the data is available. So this is the stuff that we wanted imported. It is still showing up as incomplete just because we haven't necessarily verified or marked this particular form as being complete. So that's the only reason why it's showing up red, but the data has been entered. And so the last thing that I do want to point out is something in regards to best practices when importing data. And that is toggling over to the data quality feature that you have in your project and just ensuring that these additional data validation checks have also been done and that there are no issues. So we could execute all the rules. And aside from this first one, we should see that there is nothing here. And the reason why it's good practice to do this is because REDCap won't necessarily identify certain issues in the data that is being imported. So say, for example, we have the GAD total score, which is the sum of individual item responses. And say for a particular participant, we have the individual responses already entered into REDCap, but we don't necessarily, for whatever reason, we don't necessarily have that calculation. And so what REDCap will do when you try and import, say, a total score into a field is that it will just take that value that you want to import at face value. And so it won't actually see whether or not that value aligns with the sum of the item responses that you do have in REDCap. So if there was an issue with that, it would come up in rule H and be shown here. So that's why it is just good practice after you are doing any sort of data import to ensure that there's no additional flags that are raised as a result of your import. And that if there are, then you can address them as need be. But that pretty much finishes this demo on how to import data. So I hope that was helpful.